In this video, I just want to go over the dose settings, particularly the target and the offset. I already made a video that goes over all of the buttons and all of the menu items, but in general, really the only menu item you're going to interact with regularly is the dose settings. So the machine is on, the beans are in it. I've already kind of purged the chutes to make sure that everything has stabilized, but I'll do that again really quickly just to show you how it's done. So beans are in, cup is on. I'm going to purge the left chute and the right chute, and I'm just going to pour these beans back in the top. So now everything should be good to go. And I'll just demonstrate really quickly. We'll go into the dose menu. My target is 17.90 and my offset is 5.0. And I'll click the down button to initiate a manual dose here. Pretty good. It's at the lower range of the target, but it is technically above the target we set. So you can see it dosed pretty quickly. The high-speed portion of the dosing went pretty close to the final target, and then the fine dosing mechanism didn't have to run very long to reach the final target. So that's pretty good. I mean, you could tweak it a bit, but probably not really worth your effort. This is kind of the way it would come from assembly, and it works well. However, just so I can demonstrate how offset works, if I go back to the dose settings and go over to offset, the offset is how far from the final dose the machine switches over from using the high-speed mechanism to the precision mechanism. So if I make this number much bigger, so I'll go from 5 grams to 8 grams, this is what happens. So it still gets to the final target perfectly, but you'll notice that it switched over from the high-speed mechanism to the precision mechanism much earlier, and therefore it just took a lot longer to dose. And in some cases, beans flow super fast. The way I have it set is that the default settings should work for pretty much any bean when you receive it, but depending if the beans flow slower, if they tend to be really dark roast or really stale beans, sometimes I've noticed that they flow a bit slower, and it might be worth tweaking the offset. That's really the only time that changing the offset might be worth your while. So let's suppose that you were dosing these beans and that's how long it took to dose. Well, you notice that it switched over to the precision dosing mechanism at about 13 grams, which is a little bit early. So we could correct that by going back to 5. And now if you watch again, the high-speed dosing mechanism stops a lot later and much closer to the final target. So that took a lot less time, but is still accurate. So again, I don't really anticipate that happening very often. There isn't that much variation between bean types, but if you find yourself getting impatient, you can always decrease that offset and try to get the high-speed dosing mechanism as close to the final target as possible. Just note that there is some variation in how much comes out each time, so you want to give yourself some buffer so that it doesn't overshoot. And that's the next thing I will show. I will make this overshoot intentionally. So I'm gonna go back to the dosing menu, and I'm gonna make this way too small. So I'm gonna change it from 5 to 3 grams and start a dose. So you see it overshot the target of 17.9 or 18-ish by 1.5 grams. And this is why typically from the quote factory settings, I have it more on the conservative side. So it will take a bit longer, but it's much less likely to overshoot. However, so this shouldn't happen if you receive it because I set it more on the conservative side. But if this does happen for some reason, very easy fix. All you have to do is note how much it overshot by. So this one overshot by about 1.5. So if I go to the dose, I'm going to increase this by 1.5. Now, that quick math I did here is gonna get us to exactly the stop point, which is probably not conservative enough, and that's why you'll notice that the default for this is 5, not 4.5, but I'll show you what happens. So the way you can kind of adjust this on your own and kind of find the value that works best is as follows. So we know that we overshot by 1.5, so I increased the offset by exactly 1.5. So now let's run this again, and you'll see that it will probably overshoot, but by much less. So this time it overshot by 0.2, which is, usable in some cases, and that's actually a way you can kind of play with the offset. Is if you are if your focus is speed and you don't really care about precision, you can always make the offset really small and then just tune it for the final target and use this. So if this is acceptable, you're always welcome to tune it so that the fine dosing mechanism doesn't even run. It just uses the imprecise high-speed mechanism. But supposing we're still trying to get this to work properly, we again note, okay, so this overshot by 0.2, so I need to increase my offset even more. Just to be safe, I'm going to give myself a buffer of even more. So we'll go back here, and we'll put this up to 5, which is where it was before. Oh, and I got to trigger it. Perfect. So it got pretty close. You'll notice that it got to about 7.23-ish before it switched the mechanism. And in general, I'd recommend you giving yourself a buffer of about 1 gram, because if you get the high-speed dosing mechanism too close to the target, it will occasionally overshoot. So it's best to kind of, oops, I lost a bean there. It's best to give yourself at least 1 gram of buffer. Perfect and super fast. And if you really want to have fun and you're willing to tinker, you can always, whoops, I pressed the wrong button. I'm just going to stop it here. You can always stop it by pushing on the catch cup. Supposing I want it to get even closer to the final dose before it switches over. What if I put this to like 4.8? Let's see how that does. Okay, it overshot a little bit, but that was actually the fine dosing mechanism, so it's not a good example. Let's try that again. Okay, it's actually working, so let's push it even closer. Let's go 4.6. Okay, still working. So essentially what you can do is you can keep making the offset smaller and smaller and smaller, or smaller than whatever the default was, until you're getting really close to the final target. And again, the closer you get, the higher probability there is that it will occasionally accidentally overshoot. But it's sort of like up to you. If you have a preference for really trying to get as much speed as possible, like that, in this case, it only had to pulse the fine dosing mechanism 1 time. But the risk is that it's more likely to overshoot. But you can tweak that as much as you like. Perfect. So essentially that's just the only things you'll need to change. I'm just going to reset it here and go to, just for the sake of simplicity, go back to the default where I give myself a bit more error margin of 5. Whoops. And I'm going to show like the kind of the extremes here. So 17.9. What if I wanted 27.9? Let's see how that goes. Nailed it. It didn't even use the fine dosing mechanism, but you can see that the cup can probably hold a little bit more. So actually, let's see. Whoops. So that was my fault. I bumped it. The dangers of working under the camera. Let's see if we can get it up to 30 here. I haven't actually pushed it. Just going to do this too. Okay, 30 with an offset of 5. So you may have seen one bean kind of bounced out, but it got up to 30, and there's some room there. It may not work in an ideal situation, in an ideal way, but the cup with the funnel or the spout on it may have a little bit more room, so you may be able to get up to 30. But you can see, I don't know of anyone who doses 30 for espresso, or maybe pour over. I don't know. But yeah, I'd say 30 is about the limit. And then of course I know some people dose very low. Let's just try 10 and see what happens. Boom, perfect. So that's an overview of how you set the target and the offset. Again, in general, from assembly, I try to set them where it won't overshoot with any bean, and it will kind of be generally good. But in some cases, if you're using an extremely light bean, it may not dose as fast as you would like, and you can always tweak the offset, as I've shown here, to kind of push the speed performance up without compromising on accuracy.